and the amount of speech or video content required of you has shortened pretty drastically from, I remember at one point in time, it used to be 26 hours of someone speaking to get to a real deepfakes. Now to sub-minute times, and
Yes.
you can get a deepfake within 3 seconds. So a TikTok audio or video of you is good enough to fool your grandparent that it is you asking for money.
Vijay, Balasubramanian, welcome back to the VoiceBot podcast.
Thanks so much, Brett, for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here today because we've been doing a lot of work around deepfakes, and you know a lot about this. You've been doing this. When was your first patent issued in deepfake detection?
So we've been doing deepfakes for the last 8 years, and the first one was issued in 2017, so about 6 years back. And now we have, we've applied for 17 different patents. So there's a lot of deepfake innovation here at deepfake detection innovation here at Pindrop.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just talking to the CIO of the USPTO actually, and this was one of the topics that we discussed.
Yeah.
Obviously, very hot on the topic list of people who are worried about fraud.
Yeah.
So I actually want to show a couple deepfakes. That's really going to be the focus today, but we're going to talk about other things as well. You probably ought to tell people a little bit about Pindrop so they get the 60-second summary and they're oriented.
Yeah. No, so at Pindrop, we work on voice authentication and deepfake detection. And we do this for some of the biggest institutions. We have 8 of the top 10 banks, 5 of the top 7 insurance providers, 3 of the top 5 healthcare providers. And what we're fundamentally doing is we're allowing people to be their natural self and get through their bank accounts, get through their healthcare records without needing to remember questions, needing to move around for your phone and get an OTP, but just using your voice, your device, your behavior, and being able to detect, are there risk signals like, is this a deep fake? Is this someone trying to replay your voice? Is this a Skype phone calling from Nigeria? And things like that to ultimately give organizations confidence that they're actually talking to Brett and not a voice clone of Brett, or not someone sitting in West Africa stealing your money.
Yeah. Always important to discern that. And I just had this conversation with someone today. They weren't actually really sure why people wanted voice authentication at all. And I think they were under the misperception that this is basically just for banks to prevent fraud, when really most of them are really focused on CSAT. They just want, the customer wants to get through the process faster.
Yeah, it's funny. Right now, the authentication process at an organization takes anywhere between 44 seconds when you're doing just a normal, let me ask you your date of birth, mother's maiden name, and a bunch of inane questions, to step up authentication where it takes up to 2 minutes. And then sometimes they throw in an OTP token, which needs to get to you. Then you need to read it, all of that stuff. And ultimately what they're seeing is anywhere between 40 seconds to 2 minutes of them trying to determine whether it's really you. So imagine when you're doing hundreds of millions of calls, and your first thing that you're doing with every customer of yours is treating them like a criminal. That's like an awful experience. And so just by making sure that you're saying, this is Brett, and I know this because I am sure of his voice, I'm sure of his device, I'm sure of his behavior, I know it's not a deep fake. By virtue of you doing that, you shorten all of that time and you give customers a wonderful experience. And the really interesting thing is we saw this in COVID in big numbers.
Oh, sure.
Before COVID, we had 60% of consumers saying, hey, I don't want to answer all these questions. I don't want an OTP. Sign me up for voice authentication. After COVID, that number has jumped to 79%. So a 19% jump as soon as COVID, where you're all the time trying to do things remotely, right? You're not going into a branch and you're trying to do these complicated things. And it was really interesting to see lots more consumers adopt it. So right now, every time one of our organizations offers voice authentication to a consumer, 79% of the times they're saying, yes, sign me up, which is an incredible number, I think.
It is. And I think I'm glad you brought that home,
Yeah,
because the point is the users want this, the customers want this,
yeah,
and it does help
yeah,
the enterprises, because they save cost. If these
right,
things are shorter, they can do
yeah,
more calls, all these other things.
yeah,
If it detects them more accurately, there's going to be less risk of fraud.
yeah,
And but even when there's less risk of fraud, it's not just the bank that saves. If there's fraud, who who pays for that? I mean,
yeah.
the bank might pay for it physically, but like time and other aspects, I mean, that's a big issue for consumers.
Yeah, and in the banks, you have some of these things like the insurance limit. So if you have 250K, the bank will cover that for you. But if it's higher than that, if you're a high net worth individual, you have no coverage. But this isn't just true in banks, right? Like you have retailers where there are fraudsters who essentially what they're doing is they're getting onto your account, taking over your account and saying, oh, I bought these bunch of things, but they never showed up. So I want a reimbursement. And they're stealing money from your credit card. And then your account goes down the drain. And then the organization is saying, okay, there's a chargeback. So by the time you get back your money, it's crazy. So it's all of this nightmare that a consumer has to go through. So sometimes it's obvious how you get your money back. Many times it's not. And that's the problem, right? Like my very first example is there was this 70-year-old lady whose account was getting compromised. And when the bank called her and said, your account is compromised, but we figured out because of a tool we were using, and that was a Pindrop tool, your identity has been compromised. Here's the steps you need to take, but we would have reimbursed your money no matter what. She said, if I woke up and saw my bank account go down to zero, since I'm a widower, I'd have had a heart attack. So
Yes,
the fact that they would have reimbursed her money back wouldn't have helped because
it would have been
once you wake up
devastating.
and see your bank account go
Yeah.
down to zero, man, like just imagine if you're 70 years old and your bank account suddenly goes to zero.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how much time? And so
Yeah,
I think that's like a really interesting thing. And fraud has been around for a long time. Maybe
yeah,
it's I heard cooking was the second profession, maybe fraud was the third. It's like obviously it's an ancient discipline.
yeah,
And technology has always been used. And I
yeah,
think that what we've seen as we've moved online
yeah,
is social engineering, which was always there. That was like
yeah,
the first technique that people
yeah,
used. But social engineering plus technology, and it's
yeah,
like essentially an arms race.
yeah.
And deepfakes, voice clones are the latest in that string of tools.
Yeah, I think the way we think about it is initially it always used to be humans pretending to be other humans, and that's your classic social engineering. And you're right, it's still a very effective method, right? Like the MGM hack. If you talk to the ransomware folks or you see the articles where they've interviewed the ransomware folks, they said, yeah, it was a 10-minute phone conversation and we got this $33 billion company down to their knees losing about $100 million. So, the classic social engineering works really well. Then you had people use simple technology. So bots pretending to be you, trying to spoof your phone number, trying to alter your voice. They were simple machines. And even there, you needed to use captchas and all of these things to differentiate between a human and a machine. And then with Gen AI, you have Gen AI machines pretending to be humans. And that's where you have deep fakes and synthetic IDs and disinformation come in. And that is really hard, right? Like once you have these Gen AI machines that are constantly learning, constantly getting better, and in many cases, it's so hard to differentiate between a human and a Gen AI machine. That's the next evolution of those attacks.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of those tools, like you were set up originally, you set up the company. It's part of your PhD research, right?
Yeah.
You just wound up turning into a company because you were trying to identify all these signals that would help create a flag or a warning while they were trying to execute social engineering, but
Yeah.
you had all these other signals that people could actually identify and say, wait a second, this needs further investigation.
Yeah, the initial part was purely social engineering, right? Like, why is suddenly Brett's account getting accessed by a device that's originating in Eastern Europe? That's kind of weird. Or the Philippines, that's kind of weird. So that's what it originally started off with, someone else pretending to be you somewhere in the world, even potentially here in the US. And we started there. Then we started seeing like these simple machines, right? Like every time there was a data breach, there would be a bot that started mining for all of your information. Oh, I have Brett's social security number, but who is Brett? Oh, let me go try that social security number against every single top 20 bank. And oh, bank number 5 responded saying, welcome back, Brett Kinsella. Your account balance is whatever. Aha, Brett has money in his bank account and he banks here. Now I can go further. So it's that classic combination of I'm going to use a machine, and that machine, I'm also using it to social engineer you. Now that I've gotten I know you bank with bank number 5 and you have an account balance of 140,000, I'm then going to send you a text saying, hey man, I think your account's been compromised. You have $140,000. It's going to be debited by $10,000. Do you accept? Otherwise, click on this link. I mean, when a machine combined with a human has that much information about you, you're like, how do they know my account details? They must be my bank. And so I'm going to give up all of my information. So it's this really interesting cycle of humans supplementing machines and machines supplementing humans. And Gen AI, like you said, is just that extension, is the next kind of attack that organizations need to protect against.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's show a couple deepfakes. I think a lot of people know what deepfakes are, have come across them. We're going to talk about deepfakes and voice clones today. Yeah. We've got some data to run down. We're going to talk about the technology as well. But a couple of examples here, and let's just pull them up. So this first one that was kind of interesting. So, and those of you just listening afterwards, you'll like this because you'll recognize this voice.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality?
So I thought that was really good one to start with, because what we have is the full video. So it's a deep fake visual. It looks like Morgan Freeman. I don't remember what age this would be, but he's in his older years, and it sounds a lot like his voice.
It does. It's incredible, right? And that's where, right, I couldn't make out the difference. And the really interesting thing is when we did the study with people saying, okay, here's a random video, tell us if it's real or a deep fake, humans got it right about 57% of the time. That is, they're 7% better than a coin toss or a monkey in predicting if it's a deep fake or not. And so, your brain is always trying to convince your ear to do some kind of pattern matching. So you're always inclined, because you're human, to try to see a pattern. And deepfakes play into that in a big way. And that particular deepfake, and I've seen several of them that are that good, but that one is really good. And they've done the right thing, right? Like they've got a lot of the background blacked out so that you can't make out that the lighting is off. Morgan Freeman is not moving his head too much side to side. So it is, you're seeing that. And they've taken the extra effort of making sure the lips sync with the voice. So it is a really high quality deep fake. And that's what's more of those are what to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to your comment, we did a study, I think it was in 2019, and we had 250, 300 people, and essentially in a focus group, which just listened to synthetic voices and human voices. And in 2019, the synthetic voice technology was not nearly as good as it is today. No. These weren't even like Tachytron voices. These were much earlier. And like a significant portion would call the human synthetic and the synthetic human. We'd play them sort of unaided. They would just listen to things. They give us feedback. And then we'd say, was that a human voice? And it's just like, it was amazing. And even at that, but part of it too sort of goes back to what you're talking about. We're on the phone, we're online, and we're used to degraded quality sometimes.
Yeah.
And so it takes our level of observation down a level, because a little glitch when we're watching online is not that uncommon.
Yeah.
A little distortion sometimes when we're on the phone is not that uncommon. We're on a cell network. We went from this era when like phone calls were crystal clear.
Yeah.
The phone calls weren't, because we went to mobile, but like there was a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Like Maybe we didn't have the quality of service, but we actually had this other stuff.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's harder to be discerning
Yeah.
because it doesn't, the patterns, even the patterns where there's errors, they're similar to what we encounter on a regular basis.
Yeah. And the technology's come so far, right? Like you're right. Back in 2019 and 2018, I remember when John Legend was the voice of Google, the Google
Yes.
Home, they had him come and record for hours on end his voice to create a version. And now the latest voice cloning software can do it with 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Combine that with the fact that a fraudster is using this in a high pressure situation. I'm telling you, I need money right now because I'm your loved one or something like that, or I'm giving you a piece of information that plays to your bias, or I'm trying to steal something from you, right? Like in each of those situations, it's a high pressure situation. You're right, the quality could be degraded, so you don't know. But all of that plays into the situation that you are going, if you are susceptible to something like this, you will be even more susceptible to that, largely because the quality has gone up pretty significantly, and the amount of speech or video content required of you has shortened pretty drastically from, I remember at one point in time, it used to be 26 hours of someone speaking to get to a real deepfakes. Now to sub-minute times, and
Yes.
you can get a deepfake within 3 seconds. So a TikTok audio or video of you is good enough to fool your grandparent that it is you asking for money.
Yeah. And even for the super high quality ones, where it used to be 6 to 20 minutes, even not even like you could get really high quality ones a few years ago. Like I was just talking to one of the CEOs of a company who makes synthetic voices.
Yeah.
And he's just like, 20 seconds is good. If you give me 2 minutes, you won't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's really interesting. Okay. Let's give a different example here. This is a really popular one. So Deep Tom Cruise. And if those of you are just listening, so just listen, and those of you are watching too, and we'll see if you had different experiences.
What's up, TikTok? You guys cool if I play some sports? I love it. More for the audio experience as much as the momentum. Hey, listen up, sports and TikTok fans. If you like what you're seeing, just wait till what's coming next.
Okay, so this one was a little bit different, and it would be really interesting to see the people who watch this on YouTube versus the people who listen to it, because that is an actor. It's Deepfake. This was by Chris Ume, and people might know him. He was on the VoiceBot podcast like 2 years ago before he became super famous with America's Got Talent and all these other types of things. But he founded a company called Metaphysic afterwards. Deep Tom Cruise was sort of his COVID project that he did with an actor. And it looks like him. And the actor is kind of a Tom Cruise impersonator, but it's not his voice. It looks a lot like him. And people just see it and mannerisms and everything in the face. They think it is.
Yeah. And that's the point, right? Like getting the video and the voice together is really hard. In fact, when you are using deepfake detection technology, one of the things it's depending upon is the lip sync, which is the mouth moving like the audio? And you could see that in that particular video, right? Like the face clearly looked like Tom Cruise, at least close up. When it went further away, there was kind of, you could make out it wasn't Tom Cruise, but then the voice was nothing like Tom Cruise. And so, but it's a real human voice. And this is a super interesting point, which is, a lot of people think about voice authentication and say, now that deepfakes are here, you have to throw voice authentication out. But this is where, right? Like if you had Jordan Peele impersonating Obama, and you have a very good version of Obama, because Jordan Peele doesn't have the vocal tract of Obama, a simple voice authentication tool will be able to detect that it's Jordan Peele, even though he's human and not a machine, that he is Jordan Peele as opposed to Obama. And that's where you need both of those capabilities, right? Like the notion that, is this the right human? So this is not Jordan Peele being Obama. This is not your spouse trying to defraud you. And at the same time, is it a real human or is it machine generated? And both those questions are important to answer, because if you don't have both those answers, you're susceptible to one kind of fraud or the other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're going to look at some data in a few minutes because we did a national consumer survey together. And actually, what I found was fascinating was that consumers overwhelmingly want voice authentication more because of the existence of deepfakes and voice clones. So we'll talk about that in more detail. Let me show a different type of example here. This is a CNBC anchor, and I'll get it started.
Back to last call. I'm Brian Sullivan. It's Deepfake Friday, and we're talking to an innovative company that can replicate any human's face, voice, and personality through an algorithmic process in a matter of minutes. Don't believe me? Well, I'm not real. I'm a Brian Sullivan digital double, created by a startup called Brask, using images and video of the real Brian to compile what's called a mask. I'm being replicated by a stand-in actor to read this monologue, and then my appearance and voice is changed using artificial intelligence. So now that I've got your attention, let's send it back to the real Brian Sullivan as we dive deeper into this revolutionary technology. I have not seen that before that. They told me I could not look at it, just kind of wear the same thing. That was amazing, a little terrifying. I'm shocked at how handsome I actually am. But other than that, it was a little bit, I mean, this is amazing. So let's talk about that now.
Okay, so this was also very interesting because this was a deep fake, and then we had the actor come on. So those of you who are listening, you got to hear up front the deep fake version, and then they were split screen. You heard the real person. What do you think about that? I saw they had some issues with the lip sync on the deep fake for sure from the visual, but the voice clone was excellent.
Yeah, see, this is the other side of the problem, right? Where because it's Brian Sullivan and you have so many hours of audio recording, you can create something really, really good. Yes. But the face, you could see, right, like was sleepy. And these are things, right? Like the face was droopy a lot of times. You see this in voice as well, voice cloning. Like if you actually get a voice out of YouTube, which has noise, like you will hear the voice drone out a lot because the system doesn't know where it's signal and where it's noise, and so kind of merges the two together. And so you saw that his eyes were getting very droopy from time to time. But that's the thing, right? Like you have to manage both of them. And I think the examples that you've provided are phenomenal, Brett. Now I understand why you put these three together. One that was a great combination of voice and video, one that suffered on the voice side and one that suffered on the video side.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, I actually have one more to show you, the one that you'll recognize. Okay, so we'll push play here. And this is on the screen for those of you who are just listening afterwards. This is Senator Blumenthal during a hearing
on the
U.S. Senate
oversight of artificial intelligence, the first in a series of hearings intended to write the rules of AI. Our goal is to demystify and hold accountable those new technologies to avoid some of the mistakes of the past.
Okay, so just to describe to people what's going on here, Pindrop actually has a solution, and in this case, we're talking about liveness detection. And it's going through this video, and Senator Blumenthal is at this U.S. Senate hearing, and he's introducing the concept for the day. And you can see in the overlay here that the liveness score is in the green. It's high. Pindrop is actually identifying that this is a real person. So let's continue.
And now for some introductory remarks. Too often, we have seen what happens when technology outpaces regulation. The unbridled exploitation of personal data, the proliferation of disinformation, and the deepening of societal inequalities.
Okay, so what you just heard there was it switched over to a synthetic voice, which I thought was a good replication, although you could tell it was a different audio quality than what he had, so that like you could tell the difference there. But again, a very good one. And then you saw on the screen here, the liveness detection went down to like 1%, 2% likelihood. Tell me about this, Vijay. This is something obviously your team worked on a lot.
Yeah. There's a couple of things. One is that liveness is actually done in real time. So it's sampling every 3 seconds of audio. Again, you have people who are like, okay, upload the video and then we'll give you the results a day later, an hour later. But when you're dealing with a real-time bank transaction, it has to be instantaneous. And the fact is that in a lot of situations, we find, for example, you might start off with the customer and they're coerced into doing something, and then the fraudster takes over. So you want to be able to, in that particular call, have continuous authentication. And so one thing that we are always particular about is how can you do this in real time? So what was happening there is in real time, every 3 seconds, it was saying, is this real or is this a deep fake? And as you can see, during the portion where it was real, it had a score close to 1. And during the portion where it was fake, it had a score close to 0. And what it's trying to do is look for both spatial and temporal artifacts that determine, is this a machine and therefore not live, or is this a human and therefore live? I can go into detail of what I mean by spatial and temporal artifacts, but those are the things that allow us to detect that this is a deep fake as opposed to a real human.
Yeah, let's talk about the technology. I mean, you have the patents. In fact, I think you started working on your first research in 15 or maybe 17 or 18, your first patent, but you have many now either filed or awarded.
Yeah.
Talk about how it works.
Yeah, so we have close to 100 odd patents, out of which 17 of them are in the deepfake space itself. So a pretty significant body. But how it works is there's 2 kinds of features that we're looking at. One is spatial features. So, and this is true both in the audio and the video domain. A spatial example is a fricative. So when you say San Francisco, the S and F are what are known as fricatives. It's when your mouth is compressed to a very small channel. And that's the same sound that happens when there is noise as well, the sh sound. So there's very subtle way in which humans are transforming noise to actually meaningful phonemes like S and F. And so that a lot of these machines generate them poorly. And so when they're representing them in the form of codecs, they're actually representing them wrongly, or they have some very characteristic ways in which they represent them. So they leave behind telltale signatures. So we're not only able to detect that's a deep fake, but which engine generated that deep fake. And right now we have about 110 different engines that TTS systems, text-to-speech systems, that we can detect. The second, which is way more powerful, is what's known as a temporal anomaly. So when you say hello, Paul, your mouth is wide open when you say hello, and it shuts down when you say Paul. The speed with which you can do that, because you have human limitations, you do that with a certain speed. Machines don't care about this. And one of my favorite examples is we actually have every conference room in Pindrop is named after a fraudster. So we have Chicken Man and Pepe. But one of those conference rooms is Giraffe Man. And Giraffe Man is because when we analyze this person's audio, the person who's using synthetic audio, we quickly realize that the only person who could have produced this piece of audio is someone with a 7-foot-long neck and moving his vocal tracts through that. And therefore, it's not human generated. And so because these systems don't care about these things, they're trying to convince your ear that it's actually Brett or it's actually Senator Blumenthal. You can actually detect these things. And the most powerful thing in the audio domain is even in as low fidelity a channel as telephone calls, that is phone calls, you have 8,000 samples of someone speaking every single second. So every single second, you can actually 8,000 times check to see, is the vocal tract configuration what a human would produce? And so if you have 3 seconds, you have 24,000 samples. If you have 5 seconds, you have 40,000 samples. And that's on a low fidelity channel. In the channel that we're speaking, usually the frequency is about 16,000. So 16,000 samples a second. So you have so many samples or so many points every single second to check for these things. And that helps you. And that also helps in lip sync, because the lip sync has to be right every single second. And every single second is the lip moving in 8,000 micro lip segment ways, as opposed to you, and you can only see few things, but the algorithms get to see all of those things and be able to determine, is this a machine or is this human? And that's where the power of the system comes. For a machine to actually represent all of this, it requires insane amounts of compute and storage. And maybe, if you're going after somebody super targeted, you will use that kind of compute and that kind of storage. But for the large majority of things, fraudsters will usually go on to something cheaper and easier to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you said a lot of things there, and I want to go into that a little bit.
Yeah,
so one of the things that you've been on the podcast a couple times before, so we've talked about this. I think you've got something like 200 signals just in a phone call that you can. So when you are analyzing a phone call in real time for one of your customers, you're looking at something like 220. There's more signals even but I think there's 200 that you think are important.
So there are 200 on the voice side. There are about 1,300 that are non-vocal, that is, have nothing to do with your voice, is all the background information, line noise, frequency characteristics. So there's a plethora of features.
Okay, so then when you go into deepfakes, are these new markers that you're looking for, or are they part of the existing markers?
They are new markers that you're looking for. Some of the existing markers have been modified to look for these things, right? Like, so for example, when you were previously looking for essentially voice distortion. So there's this fraudster called Bonnie and Clyde. All these names come from call center agents who get these calls over and over again. And they're like, oh, it's Bonnie and Clyde calling again. Bonnie and Clyde is actually the same West African fraudster. Every time he's going after a woman's account, he's actually using technology to increase the frequency of his voice. And when he's lazy, he's actually just using a falsetto. But oftentimes he's using technology to increase the frequency of his voice. So markers like that, you're actually extending to look at, right? Like, is the frequency raised or pitch shifted anomalously as compared, and is pitch shifted in the same way? Like, we're human, right? Like, we don't do anything twice, even in a matter of a couple of seconds. So 8,000 times a second, you're not doing these things. You're not even conscious to do them the same. A lot of these systems leave behind these telltale artifacts over and over again because they're not human. And they can't handle all the randomness that humans are naturally God-given with. And so that's these. Some of them are extensions of older features to help with deepfakes. Some of them are brand new because deepfakes leave behind, like, each of these deepfake generators actually have a set of component engines that are ranging from 3 to 9 component engines. And even, like, for example, when Meta came out with VoiceBox, they changed one piece of the algorithm. All the other 8 things stayed the same. So as soon as Meta came out, we were able to detect 90% of deepfakes generated by Meta, even though it was a 0-day attack, because 8 of those engines were leaving behind the old signatures. This one thing was creating some new variants, and very quickly you handle that variance.
All right, let's talk about some scenarios here too, because Amit Gupta is your head of product that oversees this part of the portfolio, as well as some other things too. But he's clearly a deep expert on this space. He talks about this idea that people don't understand that there are different types of fraud or fakes that can come through. So he said there's one where it's just a human speaking in their own voice, but trying to tell you there's somebody else. There's another where there's a human who's modifying their own voice. He said there's another where it's a human there, but they're actually activating a recording when they think that'll go through. So that's in that case, is it live or is it recorded? And then there's another one where it might be just synthetic all the way, or it might be partially synthetic and not. And so when you think about that, like, maybe you could just break it down for folks. Like, what's the checklist? What are you looking for?
So, like you said, right? Like, what is considered a deep fake has a spectrum. The simplest thing is something where you're just using someone's voice, you're replaying it, you're modifying it a little bit, you're slowing it down. Like the Nancy Pelosi slurring in her speech is a great example of this. That wasn't a deep fake. Like most people know, that's a cheap fake, right? Like it was just a slowing down of the audio to make her seem like she was slurring on the in her speech. Then comes synthetic audio. This is where Brett, you're okay, good. You were blurring out a little bit, so I was like wondering whether it was
the autofocus.
Yeah, I was wondering whether it was a deep fake.
Deep fake, yes.
So the second thing is synthetic. So I don't have your audio, Brett, but I know your demographics, and especially for someone who's Indian, this is very important, right? Like, can I create a voice? And some of the synthetic attacks that we saw in Q1 this year were purely demographic based. I know this is a Latin American account holder, so I'm going to use one of these systems to create a Latin American voice and use that to try and defraud the organization. So that's synthetic audio. And then comes the deep fakes, where I actually have your voice and I'm creating a targeted speech that's based on you. And that, there are multiple variants of it. There's one where I'm just creating a deep fake of you, but I'm actually typing what you're going to say. You can automate that further by using a large language model and having the responses generated by a large language model in which you automate all of that. And then the final thing is, I'm not even going to have a large language model provide the answers. I'm actually going to have a human. So imagine, Brett, you're speaking and the voice that comes out from you is my voice. That's a voice conversion attack. So deepfakes itself, or the final class of attacks, has all of these things, which ultimately makes it more and more real. And it's this entire spectrum of attack. But if you think about this entire spectrum of attack, it is not a real human saying those things. In one case, it's a replay. In one case, it's a machine-generated speech. In one case, it's a machine-generated speech, but of a particular target speaker. So in each of those cases, there was never a human in this loop. And so you can, if you think about all of those problems as one problem, you actually develop a more generic solution, a more robust solution. And that's the way we've designed the architecture to handle that entire spectrum of attacks. And that's what we call liveness. Is there a live human being on the other end of this conversation or not? And over time, we want to do this in video as well, right? Like, is this really Elon Musk showing on your Zoom call, or is it not?
Yeah. So, and you'd mentioned this earlier about this idea of all the lip movements is like one of the signals. And so how different is the fundamental technical capability to identify a voice clone versus some sort of visual deepfake?
Yeah. So the technical capabilities, voice actually helps a lot in the visual side because of the lip sync place. But the visual side also, we're starting to look at a lot of characteristics that help us. Similarly, right, spatial characteristics include things like lighting, right? You have lights, shadows can only fall a certain place. So that gives you a spatial characteristic. A temporal characteristic is you moving side to side. When you move side to side, a lot of these deep fakes and your lip sync tends to be very weird, and you can use those characteristics. So the class of features are the same. It's just the algorithms change. Also on the video side, you only have 60 frames per second. So you have less ability to look at temporal characteristics. You need more richness in an individual frame, and you need more features per frame to get to the same kind of accuracy that you get on the audio side. And so those are the kinds of trade-offs you need to make on the voice versus the video side.
Yeah. And so I have a theory that the most common denominator, not the lowest, but the most common denominator is voice for most of the applications today. There might be some where there's no audio, where someone's sort of faking the look of someone sort of walking into a business. But to me, like, and I think this is most of your business, is if you can detect whether the voice is correct or not, if it's human, if it's the right person, those types of things, it actually doesn't matter how good the visual is.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And you can think about this yourself as well, right? Like even in this conversation, when you visually see, when you're in this video, how often is my face changing as much as my voice? My voice is changing so much. I'm either excited, I'm not excited, I'm going through some other emotion, I'm trying to talk about a fact. But my face, there's only certain set of expressions I'm going through, and there's only certain set of configurations. So you're absolutely right. Voice has a lot of color, but it's also because it's the most developed, right? Like if, my favorite, one of my favorite bands is Pink Floyd, and there's a quote from Stephen Hawking there: for millions of years, mankind lived like animals. And then something happened. They learned to talk, right? That's the Stephen Hawking quote. I'm probably butchering it in few places, but that's the point, right? Like we have learned to talk over all of these years. And that's what's given all of those richness. And each of the things that humans have done, like we started cultivating these fruits that were soft to eat. That's why we have an overbite. That is, our lip can come over our mouth. And therefore, we have fricatives. So each of these things that contributes to our human speech is almost a history of human evolution. And that's what you're looking for, right? Like it's very hard to replicate that. You're not caring about all of these things. And that's why we also think voice is a really powerful way in detecting these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that. I think that's a really, really concise way to explain that to people. I really appreciate the background there, and always Pink Floyd and Stephen Hawking references are welcome here. So one of the things that we did together recently, because we're both very interested in this, you and I got on the phone. I think it was in January.
Yeah.
Kind of feels like we're on the cusp of a deepfake moment.
Yeah.
We were certainly in the midst of a ChatGPT moment, but we saw last year how we were starting to see some examples come up late in the year, particularly because the journalists were trying to break systems for banks and all these other types of things. But also we saw America's Got Talent. Metaphysic did that, and they did the replicas of Simon Cowell and Elvis and all these things. So it's just like it's coming up, and then lo and behold, we saw this. So you and I were talking in January, like, geez, we really feel like there's something here, and it's interesting because we don't know how much people know about this, and so we decided to do a couple different things. We're working on an industry survey, but we, talking about people who try to protect against this. But we also went in the field and did a consumer survey, talked to over 2,000 people, got their feedback. And one of the things as we were developing the protocol before we actually put it out, so we're sort of developed this hypothesis that voice clone is probably going to be more widely known than deepfake. And that deepfake, most people are going to think of that as video only, or maybe video plus, but it has to have a video. And we sort of developed this idea of saying, at least my hypothesis was that deepfake is the broader category. They're all deepfakes. It's a portmanteau. People don't know deep learning plus fake, right? So, but people don't have they don't have a background. If they don't know what deep learning is, it doesn't make sense. It's like a new thing to learn. Whereas voice clone, everybody knows what clones are. Everyone knows what a voice is. It's like you tell them it's a voice clone, they immediately know it. So one of the things we did is we asked people about both of them separately, and then we asked them about them together. And one of the things we found was that, as we found, voice clones are pretty widely known. So this didn't surprise me that voice clones were more widely known than deepfakes. What did surprise me is almost 2/3 of people know what a voice clone is, and over half of people know what a deepfake is. I guess it's because we were in COVID and everybody was watching YouTube all the time, but or maybe it's because it hit TikTok and that is America. But what was your thought about this? I was just really surprised that so many consumers knew that these things existed.
Yeah, it's a pretty staggering number. First, I do want to say I love the report, right? I know this was a twinkle in our eye way back in Jan. To see it actually flushed out right now is incredible to see. And it's got a lot of interesting insights. And this is one of them, right? Such a high awareness. I was not sure that you'd have this high an awareness. And yeah, Brett, you had this intuition that voice clone would be more popular, but I, for some strange reason, thought deepfake would be the thing, because you've just heard that term so often. Voice clone has become more common right now after these attacks with these banks, and the fact that voice clones are used in some of entertainment to recreate people who are deceased and things like that. But I didn't think it would be this high, but it is amazing how high it is. And I think it's largely because, like you said, right, a lot of these things are now available in a lot of in very easy ways to generate in social media, as well as in entertainment, right? Like there's a lot of use of this in entertainment. And if you look at all of the big sci-fi shows, they all have some variant of a deep fake or a voice clone. And it's probably why there's such a high awareness.
Yeah, I think it is. And we'll look at some of that data as well. And just like just show this, like what we're showing right now, is that the deepfake and voice clone encounters by channel. And for both deepfakes and voice clones, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook are the first four. And then you move into more traditional media like movies, documentaries, television, those types of things. But it is social media that's driving this. Another thing that I thought was really interesting is that the deepfake numbers are actually higher in terms of encounters than the voice clone ones. And it seems to run opposite of what you think of awareness is. But the interpretation here is pretty straightforward. If someone has seen a deepfake and knows what deepfake is, they've seen it across multiple channels. Whereas voice clones aren't showing up necessarily all these different places as frequently, or they're just thinking them as deepfakes and not voice clones and things like that. But I thought that was like fascinating that, we've got 49% of the people who have seen a deepfake saw it on YouTube, and 43% saw it on TikTok. Now that's, there's half the people that, or 45% of the people that have never seen one, but this is where we are.
Yeah. And I think it's to your point, right? Like deep fakes are associated with video. And so the video channels flash higher on that deep fake sentiment. But if you look at the audio side of things, like Spotify or on a call, you actually see the voice clone side higher. And that's because, there are more audio mechanisms. But like you said, I think the surprising thing is, I thought, Spotify would have more, especially with what was it, Weekend and Drake's collaboration, by Ghostface, I think it was. So maybe it's just not as popular as Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise and all of these things that have come, and Nicolas Cage on YouTube and TikTok. So maybe, it's going to be slowly coming up. If we have the survey a year from now, and there's a lot of audio content from these popular creators, maybe it'll change.
Yeah, I think it absolutely might. And, really just to point this out, on a call, 13% of the people that were familiar with voice clones, so it's like, call it 64% of the population, and 13% of that, so you can just like knock that in half. So call it 6.5% of people have heard a voice clone on a phone call. Yeah. I didn't think it would be that much, but you think about tools like voice mod and things like that people have used just for fun and for gaming and to prank friends. It's made it super easy. Yeah. And we've got 11% of the people have made a voice clone themselves. So like when you do it's going to be over 5% of people said they've made a voice clone because it's so easy. And a lot of times it's free.
So easy. It's funny. My son's 5 years old and he already knows. I mean, maybe it's because I'm in this space, but he knows what a deep fake is because my research team created a deep fake using, this video and audio software of a Christmas address. And they just played it to, something new. And it was remarkable how good it was. Like my son was like, "Oh, Appa, that's you in Christmas, but Christmas is not yet here. How come you're wearing a Christmas sweater?" And he just didn't realize that was like 2 years back. And it was, it was created, with all my inflection of passion, right? Like it's crazy. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's hit on a couple more of these things.
Yeah.
So another thing is deepfakes have high awareness, but there's high concern level. And just in terms of registering some concerns, slight, moderate, very extremely, both deepfakes and voice clones, over 90%. And both are about 60% when you say just the very and extremely. So people have high awareness, but they are very much in the mind that because they have awareness, they're concerned. And if we just think about, and I'll go through a couple of these here and I'll let you react to all of them. You think about deepfakes, positive and negative sentiment, about 38% positive, 49% negative, right? But something really interesting here, and we see this in both deepfakes and voice clones, is that the people who are the most positive also express the most concern. So the positive, like overall, 38% are positive. The people who also said they were extremely or very concerned are 52% positive towards the technology. It's just like completely inversed,
Yeah.
I think, of what most people would say, what most people would think was there.
Yeah, I think, the fact that people are concerned, like, to me, deep fakes break all trust. Businesses can't trust individuals, individuals can't trust information, and individuals can't even trust each other, right? Like, because in each of those cases, you don't know who's producing that piece of video or audio content. So I think the concern is right up there because it just fundamentally shatters your notion of what a human being is. And so I agree with that. The second set of charts where they're both positive and negative, that's super interesting. But I think that goes to show that when any new technology comes, you're always having this "there be dragons" moment, right? Like you're like excited. Oh my God, what does this mean? And you're like, oh man, I'm also afraid of it. It's that very human thing, right? Like where you're both excited about it, but you're also nervous about it. It happens when my son's going to school with it for the very first time, right? Like he's nervous about it, but he's also excited about what he's going to face. And you, depending upon the moment, those two polarities kind of hit you at the same time, and that's what makes you human.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we'll just point this out because I'll throw the voice clone numbers up here. 34% positive, 49% negative. So not as positive for voice clones, like a more negative net result here. But in both situations, what we see is an actual bifurcation. It's basically a reverse normal or an inverted normal distribution, in that basically people wind up at the extremes, either very negative or very positive. And then there's a bunch of people in the middle, but it's really the polls that are the most important here.
Yeah. I think that's the story of all Gen AI, right? Like you're either super excited or you're super worried about sentient AI, and I think that's part of the entire equation.
And by the way, I'll put links to all these deepfakes in the show notes, and I'll put a link to this report. It's over 70 pages. We have, I think, 55 charts in there. There's a bunch of tables, and then there's also 8 or 10 examples of things that have happened. Everything from like videos trying to get investment scams with Elon Musk and all these different types of things. So I think anybody who's interested in seeing more about the space, it'll be a really good resource for you. And I want to bring up something else. So we have all this concern.
Yeah.
But what are people concerned about? And we asked them about a lot of different things. Banking, number one, over 2/3 of the people say this is where I have concern. Politics and government, second at 55%, also 55%. Media and disinformation. Then we go healthcare, insurance, and then everything else. Okay. It's like once you get through banking, healthcare, insurance, politics, government, media, and disinformation, people are like, maybe. It's like mostly not concerned.
Yeah. And I think that's true, right? Like, when it's a bank or a healthcare or an insurance, that's your hard-earned money or your health records. And so yes. I think the concern is crazy because if they don't know who you are, is your money safe? So that concern comes naturally. And then the second thing, I think both politics and government and media disinformation are kind of similar because in each of those cases, you have a powerful figure, either it's a celebrity or a politician, and you don't know if that information is trustworthy or not, is real or not. And so I think that's the entire misinformation, disinformation class. But again, I think both of that goes to show how much trust gets broken by virtue of this, of deepfakes.
Yeah, really well said. And I think that's what a lot of people are, what is real? Are people good at? And I think the important thing is there's two sides of this. One thing is on the one side, we have I need to identify if something is fake.
Yeah.
But if I'm concerned that some things are fake, I need to also identify if something is authentic.
Yeah.
Right. And so people are only looking about, can I identify the things, but is there a way that we can identify authenticity as well?
Yeah.
So I think that's like a really important thing.
And you're absolutely right? Like, otherwise, how do you know, right? Like you started seeing people in court cases have said, things that they've actually said, they're saying, no, that's a deep fake of me. Right?
I know.
And so it's crazy, right? Like, so it's both sides of the coin, and you fundamentally don't know what to do at this point in time.
Yeah, we need authenticity verification all over the place. So a couple other things I thought were super interesting. When we look at banks, insurance, healthcare in one column, news media in another, and social media in a third, we asked people how confident they were that these industries were prepared for this. And, if you think about it, there's a couple ways to look at this. First of all, like the plurality say they're not sure, right? But we also have above the line, we've got 40% are basically confident that banks, insurance, and healthcare organizations have taken steps to do this.
Yeah.
I don't think. You may have a different view on this. I don't think very many banks, insurance, and healthcare companies have actually done anything yet because the detection tools have not existed, and so there's a mismatch between expectations and what's actually going on there. And I wonder when that gets exposed and what the implications are for the people that haven't acted fast enough.
Yeah, so this is the thing, right? Like any new technology has the classic technology adoption curve where you have the early adopter banks. So, when there are some banks that we work with that are already creating red teams, are looking at deep fakes across audio and video. They're looking at deep fakes when, there is account transactions or account openings. So you're creating a new identity. Is it a synthetic identity or not? When you're even using your phone to access the mobile version of that bank app, is it a deep fake or is it real? So there are banks that are on one end of that spectrum, but they're few. They're a handful. And if you look at any adoption cycle, the early adopters are only 10%. And that's exactly the numbers. So the fact that people think 40% of banks have this covered, because deepfakes are not happening as often. So I think there is the misplaced confidence, but two, there is also the fact that they're not happening at the level that truly creates panic and alarm. It's happening on the consumer side for sure, but it's at these organizations, there are these few gimmicky articles that go there, but attackers are not. But that'll change very quickly. As soon as the first attackers start doing this at scale, we've seen this. They'll create guidebooks and playbooks to show you how to do it. And then every fraudster will start using it. And if the banks, healthcare organizations, insurances don't have defense mechanisms up, like liveness detection, they're going to be toast, because you can pretty much get through any defense mechanism at that point in time.
Well, the other thing too, and I'm from Pindrop and I have talked about this in some detail. The people aren't understanding that. So we have the quality piece, which is the voice clone and deepfake. Now, when we bring in some of these new generative AI technologies, they give you the scalability capability. And he said nobody's really thinking about that. They're just thinking, okay, one here, one there, looking at everything individually and not thinking about this idea that they're going to have this swarm attack that they're going to have to look at all at once.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like you're already seeing ChatGPT came before, was one of the first Gen AI tools, right? And now you have all of these tools like Fraud GPT, Worm GPT, which are large language models where the controls have been taken off, right? And now you have even things like Dark BERT, because Google released BERT, and they have all of these new variants of LLMs with the guardrails taken off. And the same thing, right? Like these fraudsters, I think it was Canadian Kingpin 12 who created these tools, right? Like these fraudsters are creating it, offering these services. Soon they're going to offer deepfake tools as a service. And those deepfake, we're already seeing versions of it where they're placing one iPhone camera next to each other, and one is projecting the deepfake video for these these selfie checks to get beaten. So you're starting to see some of these things already happen, but at scale is when these tools become automated, and that's already happening. And so it's only a matter of time, and you have to protect yourself before that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one other thing, or I'll just close on two other data points. One is that I think the banks are going to wake up very quickly, in part because what we also found in the data is that the highest income
Yeah.
cohort is the most aware.
Yeah.
They are also they're also the most concerned, but they're also the ones who have the highest confidence that their bank has done something.
Yeah.
And so they're aware, they're concerned, but they think they're protected, and most often they're probably not right now.
Yeah, I mean, the New York Times article that we contributed to, where we gave them examples of a synthetic audio. The genesis of that article was actually a high net worth individual whose private wealth advisor was fooled by a deepfake.
Yes.
So the fact is that, I mean, I think a lot of that confidence is a little bit misplaced, because are you catching deepfakes? Are you actually catching the 119 different text-to-speech engines that exist out there? Are you able to catch zero-day deepfake generators that are going to get created over time? Like, I am not too sure if you actually ask a big enterprise, can you do each of these things? They're going to answer in the affirmative. If they are, then man, they are like the most forward-thinking organization. We've not seen one, right? Like, that's where they need help. And that's where, you need to create detection tools across the board to help with this problem, because these engines, there are so many of them, right?
Yes.
There are 119 different classes of text-to-speech engines that have some component that's different. And so
a lot of them are bad actors. So there are some good actors who are doing some watermarking or sound marking in there that might help with this, but there's a lot of bad actors too. I think we'll just close with something that you mentioned very early on, which I thought was sort of interesting about this idea of whether voice authentication really makes sense in the era of voice clones. Maybe the way to get around this is there's voice clones, just don't do voice authentication.
Yeah.
But we've talked about how it's like winds up being even more important because there's so many ways to fool the systems without it. But we also ask consumers like their interest in voice authentication. So I have two charts here. One is, essentially that over a quarter of the people are very interested in voice authentication, right? And so they know about voice clones, but they want voice authentication. And another 24% are very interested. So about half the people either want some sort of voice authentication. They think in the era of voice clones and deepfakes, this would be very important.
Yeah.
So I put another slide up here for those people who are listening, which is astounding to me. The people that are the most concerned, which also actually happen to skew towards higher education and higher income, people are most concerned. 52% are very interested. Now, I just told you that 50% overall are interested.
Yeah.
The most concerned people, 52% are very interested. And and another 17% are somewhat interested. So essentially, we've got 70% of the people that are very concerned want some sort of voice clone authentication. So I think like from a demand side, aside from the whole thing around better customer support and customer experience, and the incentives for the businesses to like do better from a fraud detection standpoint, this might be one of the big drivers here, is that the people with the highest concern are going to start shopping for places that are actually protecting them against this threat.
Absolutely. And that's where, right, like they're looking for organizations that have defense in depth, many layers protecting them, because you want to make sure, is this a deep fake or not? So is this a real human? But then the next question is this the right human? Because you could be a point solution that all you do is deep fake detection. But if your spouse can get into your account, then what's the point, right? And she has your phone, or he has your phone and is getting the OTPs. So this is where that combination of voice authentication and liveness and all of these capabilities, and I think these consumers fundamentally believe a good voice authentication solution has to have deep fake protection, because it has to be a combined solution and has to have defense in depth. And once you have all of these layers, is it the right device? Is it the right behavior? Is it the right voice? Is it a deep fake voice? When you have all of these layers, that's when you truly protect your consumer.
Vijay Bell, Supermanian, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Should people be concerned? How much should they be concerned?
Yeah, they should be concerned, and they should be asking for technology that helps them make this determination. Is it deep fake? Is it a real human? Is it the right human? all of these are the right questions, and they should be asking for organizations for this technology.
Should businesses be concerned?
Oh, absolutely. They can't trust, is it a human opening this account? Is it a human accessing this account? Is it a human transacting on this account? So they absolutely need to be concerned.
So Greg Cross, who's one of the co-founders and CEO of Soul Machines, was on our Synthedia event.
Yeah.
I think our first one back in September 2022, where we were talking about generative AI. And Soul Machines is a really popular and high quality virtual human company, and they do voice clones and virtual humans. And his presentation, the title of it was the robots are coming and they're just in time. So I sort of feel like that right now. It's just like this march of technology. We're going to have technology that shows up because it's amazing for Hollywood, but it's also really, really dangerous in the hands of fraudsters. It's going to happen. And so what we need is more technology to come in, just make sure that the good use cases are out there, which people like. And there's a lot of people with very positive sentiment about the way that it's being used for humor and videos and these types of things. But at the same time, we have to have other tools so they can have confidence that the downsides are protected against. And frankly, that is the way technology develops. Everything we do, there's unintended consequences that come from it, but we try to get the most out of what's good and we try to mitigate the downside. And in this case, I think deepfake detection is the obvious way to go.
Yeah, you're exactly right, right? Like when PCs came in, that was great technology, but then you had viruses. And so you had antivirus companies. When the internet came out, people were like, okay, how do I pay anything? And then you had all of these companies that said, okay, firewall companies that said, okay, we're going to protect you when you go to the internet. Then you had cloud, and you had cloud security companies that were born because you were like, okay, how do I send all of my data to the cloud and keep it secure? And so you had cloud security. I think the same thing is happening here. You have all of these wonderful capabilities of Gen AI, employee productivity, customer experience, brand new revenue streams, but you also have deepfakes. And so you need a security company to help and technology to help with detecting deepfakes, just like every other time.
And deepfakes for your customers, but also for other employees, because actually the biggest breaches, the biggest frauds have been employee to employee transferring money inappropriately.
Yes.
Because a voice clone or deepfake of some sort fooled them.
Yes.
And
yeah. Credentials, access to credentials, because you thought you were talking to the wrong employee or the right employee. Yes.
All right, Vijay, this has been amazing. Everyone go to pindrop.com. I'll put links in for the report for the deepfakes, and you can actually see some demos, I think, that Pindrop does as well. So we'll put that all in there. Thanks so much for doing this. We need to educate the masses on what's going on here.
Absolutely, Brett. And I think we both are on a mission there, and I really appreciate your partnership here.
All right, great. Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.